The terminal was alive with flashes of light, clicking shutters, and the electric hum of whispers that rolled through the crowd like a wave. It was late, just after midnight in New York City, but the air inside the arrivals hall at JFK was tense enough to slice through. Travelers paused mid-step, phones lifted, capturing what no one expected to see. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, newly crowned humanitarians of the year, walked through the airport doors not as a couple basking in triumph, but as two people trapped inside a private storm that had suddenly turned public. At first, the moment seemed routine. The pair emerged from a sleek black SUV, bodyguards moving in a tight formation, flashbulbs exploding in every direction. Meghan wore her signature neutral palette, beige coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, hair perfectly styled despite the hour, while Harry, dressed in a tailored black suit with the tie slightly loosened, looked tired but alert. They had just left a night that was meant to cement their image as global icons of compassion, equality, and social responsibility. Instead, it became the night that exposed the widening cracks beneath that polished surface. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. As the couple entered the terminal, a few journalists called out their names. Meghan turned slightly, the professional smile flickering on her face for a second, before her gaze shifted forward again. Then it happened, the gesture that would ignite a media firestorm before sunrise. Harry reached for Meghan's hand, perhaps instinctively, as cameras pressed closer. But Meghan's hand recoiled sharply. Her movement was quick, almost mechanical but unmistakable. She pulled her hand away and whispered something under her breath. Words the microphones couldn't catch, but the lip-reading frenzy that followed claimed to know all too well. "Don't hold my hands." The phrase spread like wildfire. Within hours, "Don't hold my hands" was trending across social media, dissected frame by fans, critics, and commentators. Was it frustration, embarrassment, or a calculated act of distance from a husband who had interrupted her earlier that evening on stage, in front of the world? What should have been a quiet post-event moment became the scene that defined their night, overshadowing the glittering award, the speeches, and the applause. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Hours before that airport scene, the same couple had stood before an audience of philanthropists, celebrities, and journalists at a prestigious Manhattan hotel ballroom. They had been introduced with reverence for their tireless humanitarian efforts, their advocacy for equality, and their global influence in reshaping modern charity. As the hall erupted in applause, Meghan smiled, radiant, the embodiment of grace and control. Harry nodded beside her, expression softer, almost shy. Cameras captured every moment. Her hand resting lightly on his back, his glance of quiet admiration. On stage, they were a symbol of unity, two people who had walked away from royal tradition to forge their own path, together. Yet as the lights dimmed and the music faded, that unity seemed to dissolve into something far more human, far more fragile. What happened between those two moments, the applause and the argument, is what this story seeks to explore. Because in that fleeting moment at the airport, everything the Sussexes had built since leaving the monarchy came under a harsh spotlight. Every choice, every appearance, every word became evidence to the public's growing obsession. Were Prince Harry and Meghan Markle still the couple who defied the world for love, or had their partnership become just another performance under pressure? To understand the gravity of that single moment, you have to step back and see the picture in full. The context, the history, the expectations that follow them everywhere. Their appearance in New York wasn't just another red carpet event. It was a calculated stage, a showcase of resilience. For months, the couple had been working to reshape their public narrative after a year of backlash, canceled projects, and growing skepticism about their global role. Being named Humanitarians of the Year was meant to restore that credibility, a crowning moment after so many public missteps. But as any seasoned observer of the royal-turned-celebrity saga knows, image and reality rarely coexist peacefully. From the beginning, Harry and Meghan have been symbols of something larger than themselves: rebellion, modernity, love against the odds. They were the couple who broke centuries of royal convention, stepping away from Buckingham Palace to live life on their own terms. But independence came with a price: relentless scrutiny, endless judgment, and the crushing weight of maintaining relevance in a world that thrives on contradiction. One day they're applauded for their activism. The next, ridiculed for seeking privacy while staying in the headlines. It's a cycle that no PR team can fully control. As Meghan and Harry made their way through the terminal that night, you could almost feel that weight pressing down. She walked ahead, her posture straight but tense, lips pressed tight. He followed closely, his hand raised slightly, a small, uncertain gesture of connection, before it dropped to his side. The cameras captured every flicker of emotion. Irritation, confusion, perhaps even resignation. Body language experts would later analyze the footage in slow motion, marking every frame as proof of an unraveling partnership. Yet, behind those still images and viral clips lies a deeper truth. A truth about two people navigating the impossible intersection of love, fame, and identity. For Meghan, the evening had been both a triumph and a test. Standing before a global audience as a celebrated humanitarian reaffirmed her place in the narrative she's carefully crafted, one of empowerment and perseverance. For Harry, the award carried different emotions. It was recognition, yes, but also a reminder of what he had left behind. The family, the title, the duty. That tension, often invisible to outsiders, has followed them since their royal exit. And that night, beneath the applause and bright lights, it simmered just beneath the surface. Some attendees at the gala would later recall subtle signs of strain. She seemed in charge of the moment, one journalist noted. Harry looked proud, but slightly detached. Another observer described how Meghan spoke for most of the speech while Harry nodded, occasionally interjecting, only to be gently interrupted. To the casual viewer, it was seamless. To those paying attention, there was a flicker, a silent exchange that hinted at something brewing. By the time the couple arrived at the airport, that silent tension had become visible. Whether it was exhaustion, frustration, or something more profound, the world would soon see only the symptom, the refusal of a hand. And while it might seem trivial in the realm of public perception, gestures carry enormous weight. A smile, a glance, a subtle pull away can redefine an entire relationship in the eyes of millions. For the Sussexes, that one gesture became a mirror reflecting everything people wanted to believe or feared about them. This story isn't about gossip. It's about perception, power, and the reality of life under an endless spotlight. It's about how moments are captured, dissected, and weaponized in an age where image is everything. What happened at JFK was more than an argument. It was a turning point in a saga that has blurred the line between authenticity and performance. Was Meghan's reaction spontaneous or deliberate? Was Harry's gesture a plea for connection or a move to defuse tension before the cameras? The answers may never be known, but the implications are impossible to ignore. Because when the world looks at Harry and Meghan, it isn't just seeing two people. It's seeing symbols of rebellion, of modern royalty, of fame's fragility. Every argument, every touch, every moment of silence becomes a statement, interpreted through endless headlines and hashtags. In that sense, "Don't hold my hands" wasn't just a phrase. It was an echo of everything they've been fighting against: intrusion, speculation, and the loss of control over their own story. And yet, beyond the spectacle, there's still the core truth that made the world fall in love with them in the first place. Two people who believed in each other enough to defy an empire. That's what makes this story so compelling. It's not the argument itself, but what it represents, the struggle to stay united in a world that thrives on division. For every critic calling it a meltdown, there are others who see exhaustion, vulnerability, even courage in showing imperfection. Because in that fleeting instant, stripped of PR polish and rehearsed smiles, the Duke and Duchess looked like what they've long claimed to be: human. As the couple disappeared through the sliding doors that night, the flashes began to fade. The terminal returned to its rhythm, luggage wheels rolling, announcements echoing, conversations resuming. But for Harry and Meghan, the moment had already escaped their control. It was online, immortalized, debated, exaggerated. By dawn, Analysts were on morning shows. Commentators were writing columns. The humanitarians of the year had become the headline for all the wrong reasons. And that's where the story begins. At the intersection of celebration and collapse, love and resentment, image and truth. The argument at the New York airport isn't just an isolated incident. It's a lens through which the world can examine how fame fractures relationships, how public adoration turns to criticism, and how even the most powerful couples are not immune to the pressures of perception. Because in the end, every great story has a moment of unmasking, the instant when the glitter fades and the truth emerges. For Harry and Meghan, that moment may have come under the harsh lights of an airport terminal, not a palace ballroom. What remains to be seen is whether that truth will break them or set them free. The ballroom shimmered beneath 1,000 crystal lights, the kind that make everything beneath them appear almost unreal. Waiters glided between tables set with champagne flutes and glittering cutlery, the hum of polite conversation blending with the rhythm of the live band playing in the corner. On this night, the air in the room was charged with admiration and expectation. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were the guests of honor, soon to be named Humanitarians of the Year. And even among New York's elite, there was a palpable excitement. It wasn't every evening that royalty walked through these doors, let alone royalty who had rewritten the script of what it meant to be royal. When Harry and Meghan entered the room, there was a ripple of applause that spread like a wave. Meghan led slightly, her stride confident, back straight, chin lifted, eyes scanning the crowd with that trained balance of warmth and authority. Harry followed, his smile polite but somewhat reserved, the trace of something thoughtful lingering in his eyes. The cameras caught it all. They always did. The couple took their seats near the stage, where a large projection screen displayed a highlight reel of their humanitarian work. Images of them in Africa, sitting with children in schools, talking to veterans, visiting shelters. To the audience, it painted a flawless picture of compassion and unity. But the human eye, as it turned out, could see what the lens often could not. The event began as any grand gala would. Speeches from dignitaries filled the air with words like inspiration, dedication, and changemakers. Guests whispered about how far the couple had come since stepping away from royal duties. One journalist at the back murmured to his colleague that Meghan was glowing, that she looked every inch the modern-day icon she always wanted to be. Another guest, more discreetly, noted Harry's distracted expression. He clapped when everyone else clapped, smiled when he was supposed to, but there was an undercurrent to his gaze, a restlessness that didn't quite match the moment's glamour. When the host finally called their names, the room erupted again. The applause was long and loud, an almost theatrical celebration of the couple's public reinvention. Meghan stood, taking Harry's hand as they walked to the stage. He let her lead, his smile returning as they ascended the steps. The pair stood before the podium, spotlights bathing them in an ethereal glow. For the cameras, this was a perfect tableau. The prince and his wife, united in purpose, embodying grace under pressure. Meghan began to speak. Her voice, smooth and controlled, carried effortlessly across the hall. She thanked the foundation for the recognition, spoke of compassion as a universal language, and of using privilege as a platform for good. Her words were measured, eloquent, and deliberate, crafted to resonate with a global audience beyond those four walls. Harry stood beside her, nodding, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He looked proud, but also as if he was thinking about something else entirely. At one point, she paused, and he seemed to take it as his cue to step forward to add something, just a few words. But before he could finish his second sentence, Meghan placed a hand lightly on his arm and resumed speaking. The interruption was so brief most people missed it. But the cameras didn't. It wasn't tension, not in the conventional sense. It was more like choreography gone slightly offbeat. A moment of misalignment that felt small yet significant. The kind of misstep that can go unnoticed to most but feels enormous to the people living it. The speech continued flawlessly. Meghan spoke about their foundation's achievements, about global empathy, about the work still to be done. Her delivery was magnetic, her composure unshakable. When she finished, The applause was thunderous. She smiled at Harry, and he smiled back, the kind of smile that looks real enough for the audience but carries a trace of effort behind the eyes. After stepping down from the stage, they mingled with other guests. Meghan glided through conversations with practiced ease, greeting influential figures, exchanging pleasantries, posing for photos. Harry followed, his demeanor polite, though noticeably quieter. Onlookers commented on how different their energies seemed, her animated and commanding, his subdued and observant. To the casual guest, it could have been simple exhaustion. To those who had seen the footage of them earlier that week in Los Angeles, the contrast was sharper. There was a sense that something had shifted between them, something almost imperceptible but undeniably present. At one table, a senior philanthropist congratulated them warmly, remarking how inspiring it was to see them using their platform for good. Meghan's expression brightened instantly, gracious as ever. Harry nodded, thanking him sincerely, his tone softer. Then, as the man turned to leave, Meghan leaned slightly toward Harry, her lips barely moving. Observers nearby caught only fragments, a few quiet words, followed by Harry's slow exhale. He nodded once, looked down, and adjusted his tie. A fleeting exchange, gone in an instant, yet somehow heavy with meaning. As the evening went on, the night took on the rhythm of an endless performance. Every laugh, every glance, every touch had the weight of expectation behind it. The photographers stationed at the back of the ballroom continued snapping, eager to capture the perfect shot, the one that would grace tomorrow's headlines. Meghan delivered it easily. A radiant smile, a graceful tilt of the head, a hand gently placed on her husband's shoulder. It was flawless. Harry, though, appeared more conscious of the cameras than ever. Each flash seemed to draw a little more of his focus away from the moment and into himself. In some of those photos, his eyes looked directly into the lens, not with anger, but with the weary acknowledgement of someone who knows how stories can shift overnight. Near the end of the event, a journalist from a major American network approached them for a brief interview. Meghan agreed instantly, her tone bright. The interviewer began with praise, then asked a question about how they balanced public advocacy with private life. Meghan's response was polished. She spoke of boundaries, self-care, and mutual respect. Then the journalist turned to Harry, asking what inspired his continued humanitarian efforts. His answer was heartfelt but hesitant, reflecting on his mother's influence, on lessons learned from loss. Meghan nodded supportively beside him. But when he began to touch on how the pressure can sometimes test relationships, the air around them seemed to shift. She interjected softly, redirecting the conversation toward shared purpose and unity. The journalist smiled. The moment passed, but not unnoticed. When they stepped away, Meghan's smile lingered just long enough for the cameras before fading as she turned her head slightly. The angle of her jaw was tight, her stride deliberate. By the time they returned to their table, the celebration was winding down. Guests were beginning to leave, staff clearing plates and folding linens. Meghan excused herself to speak with the event coordinator. Harry stayed behind, exchanging a few quiet words with a mutual friend, who later described him as distracted, a bit lost in thought. When Meghan returned, they gathered their things and began heading toward the exit. Outside, the cold December air swept across the steps, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the ballroom. The photographers were still there, waiting. The couple paused for one last picture, Meghan looping her arm around Harry's briefly for the shot. Then she let go, stepping into the car first, eyes fixed ahead. Inside the vehicle, the silence was thick. The hum of the city filled the space between them. The muffled honks, the distant sirens, the whisper of tires against wet pavement. Harry leaned back, glancing out the window at the skyscrapers disappearing behind them. Meghan sat upright, scrolling through her phone. Neither spoke for several minutes. For two people whose lives were lived so publicly, silence had become its own kind of language. To the world, the night would appear flawless. Headlines the next morning would read, "The Sussexes shine at New York Gala," accompanied by photos of radiant smiles and elegant gestures. Yet behind those curated moments, something quieter had unfolded. Beneath the layers of public image, of humanitarian accolades and designer gowns, there was a disconnect slowly taking form. The night of celebration had accomplished its purpose, on paper, but emotionally, it had set the stage for the confrontation that would come just hours later at the airport. In many ways, that ballroom encapsulated the paradox of the couple's new life. They had traded royal tradition for independence, only to find themselves performing under a different kind of scrutiny. One driven by the need to sustain relevance, to protect a brand, to live up to an ideal that seemed to grow heavier with every public appearance. The applause that followed them out the door wasn't just applause for good deeds. It was applause for endurance, for surviving in a world that devours the very people it celebrates. As their car pulled away from the hotel and merged into the stream of city traffic, Meghan finally set her phone down and exhaled. Harry glanced at her, searching for something in her expression that might bridge the space between them. But her gaze was fixed forward, distant, as though already moving on to the next thing, the next appearance, the next headline, the next carefully crafted moment. He looked down, fingers tapping lightly on his knee, a small restless rhythm that mirrored his thoughts. The night of celebration had been a victory in the public eye. But behind the glass walls of that limousine, the divide between public triumph and private truth had never felt wider. The applause had faded, the lights were behind them, and all that remained was the quiet question that would soon explode into public view. How much longer could performance and reality exist side by side before one had to give way to the other? The ballroom lights dimmed behind them as they stepped into the corridor leading to the private exit. The echo of applause still lingered faintly in the air, a distant reminder of the stage they had just left. Meghan's stride was brisk, her heels clicking against the marble floor in sharp rhythm, while Harry followed a few paces behind, head slightly lowered. The doors to the staff hallway opened quietly, closing out the last of the noise. What had been a night of celebration was quickly shifting into something far more subdued, almost somber. Away from the cameras, the silence between them seemed louder than any sound. In the elevator down to the car park, Meghan stood with her arms folded, scrolling on her phone, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. Harry watched her reflection in the metal walls. For a few seconds he seemed about to speak, but then stopped. He looked down, adjusting the cuff of his shirt. The elevator bell chimed softly as the doors opened into a dimly lit corridor where a small team of aides and security personnel waited. Meghan gave a polite nod, her professional expression returning instantly. The car was ready. The world outside was waiting. Inside the vehicle, the tension thickened. Meghan placed her phone face down on the seat beside her, leaning back with a deep exhale. Harry turned to her, his voice calm but deliberate. "You cut me off," he said quietly. She looked at him, expression unreadable. "During the speech," he continued, "I was trying to finish the point about mental health. It was important." Meghan blinked slowly, then replied, her tone measured. "I know, but it was off topic. The focus was the award, not a debate." Her words weren't harsh, but they carried finality. She turned her gaze back toward the window, watching the city lights blur past. Harry nodded once, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. The kind of acknowledgement that ends a conversation without resolving it. Outside, the streets of Manhattan gleamed from the rain, reflections of neon and streetlights blending together in streaks of gold and red. The car moved smoothly through the traffic, the driver silent. The aides in the front exchanged quick glances through the mirror but said nothing. They had seen the look before, the quiet, practiced calm that often followed an evening of public perfection. The drive to the hotel was brief. The couple exited through a private entrance where only a few staff stood waiting. Meghan's assistant approached immediately with a folder and a phone, updating her on tomorrow's schedule. Meghan nodded, her tone businesslike, efficient. Harry hung back, hands in his pockets, his expression distant. One of the staff offered him a glass of water. He accepted it with a polite smile. For a moment, he lingered near the lobby window, watching the reflection of the city outside. Behind him, Meghan's voice carried softly as she discussed logistics for the flight home. The sound of her control, her focus, her relentless composure. It was both familiar and suffocating. When they finally reached their suite, the door closed behind them with a quiet thud. The suite was lavish, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, soft light spilling across polished wood floors, and a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket near the table. Meghan slipped off her coat and laid it across a chair. Harry loosened his tie, the fabric falling against his shirt as he moved to the window. The city stretched beneath them, glittering, restless, indifferent. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence was not hostile, just heavy. Then, almost abruptly, Meghan broke it. "It was a good night," she said, her tone even. "Everything went as planned. The coverage will be strong in the morning. We've already got headlines coming in." Harry turned slightly, his hands resting on the window ledge. "Is that what matters most to you right now?" he asked. She looked at him, the faintest hint of irritation flickering across her face. "Of course not," she replied. "But this is what we've worked for. You know how hard it's been rebuilding everything. This recognition, it matters." Harry exhaled slowly, nodding, though his eyes told another story. He crossed the room, sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows resting on his knees. "Sometimes it feels like we're performing more than living," he said quietly. Meghan didn't respond immediately. She walked to the table, pouring a glass of champagne, her movements deliberate. "That's the cost of influence," she said. "You can't change anything if you're not visible." Harry gave a faint laugh, though it held no humor. "Visible, yes. But at what point do we stop being real?" She set the glass down. "We are real," she replied. "People see us, they hear us, and they believe in what we stand for." Her words were sharp but sincere. "We can't afford to fall apart every time the media turns." Harry looked up at her. "I'm not talking about the media." The room seemed to shrink with the weight of his words. Meghan met his gaze for a moment, then turned away, walking toward the window. "You're tired," she said softly, almost dismissively. "We both are. Let's just rest before the flight." It was a deflection, and they both knew it. He nodded again, running a hand through his hair, leaning back into the couch. The quiet stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. On the table, Meghan's phone buzzed. A notification, a headline alert. She picked it up, scanning it briefly. "They loved the speech," she said, almost to herself. "They're calling it powerful." Harry didn't answer. He stared out the window, watching the lights flicker across the river, thinking about how something could look so beautiful from a distance and yet feel so hollow up close. Later, as they prepared for the early morning flight, the tone between them remained neutral, courteous, but distant. Their assistants arrived to coordinate luggage, the hum of conversation filling the suite again. Meghan moved through it with practiced efficiency, ensuring everything was in place. Harry helped quietly, checking his passport, nodding to staff, answering questions in short sentences. When the door finally closed behind the last aide, they were alone again. Meghan sat on the arm of the sofa, scrolling through her phone, while Harry stood near the balcony door, staring at the fog creeping over the skyline. He spoke again, this time almost hesitantly. "Do you ever miss it?" Meghan didn't look up. "Miss what?" she asked. "Home," he said. She glanced at him briefly, her face expressionless. "This is home," she replied. "Everything we have now, this is what we wanted." Harry nodded, but his silence betrayed uncertainty. He thought of the gardens at Windsor, of his brother's laughter years ago, of a world that felt more defined even when it confined him. He wondered if the freedom they'd fought for had somehow become another kind of cage. Meghan stood, smoothing her dress, her voice steady but distant. "We should sleep. The car's coming at 5. She disappeared into the bedroom, the soft sound of her footsteps fading. Harry remained by the balcony, staring out into the dark city. The hum of traffic below sounded faint and endless, the pulse of a city that never slept. He felt the familiar ache of something he couldn't quite name, part regret, part exhaustion, part longing for simplicity that no longer existed. In the early hours before dawn, the suite was quiet. The city outside was beginning to stir again, the first traces of morning light cutting through the clouds. Meghan emerged, already dressed for travel, her face composed. She moved efficiently, checking her bag, speaking briefly to security on the phone. Harry appeared moments later, jacket in hand, eyes heavy from lack of sleep. They exchanged a few words about the schedule, brief, functional. Then, as they stepped out into the corridor, Meghan reached for her phone again, scanning through messages. Harry glanced at her, then looked away. The ride to the airport was silent except for the low hum of the engine. Meghan sat upright, typing something quickly, while Harry gazed out the window. The city passed by in blurred shapes of light and shadow. Occasionally, the reflection of her phone's glow illuminated her face, sharp and expressionless. He noticed how she always seemed composed, no matter the moment. He envied it and resented it all at once. When they arrived at JFK, the sun was just beginning to rise. A small group of photographers had already gathered, tipped off by someone who knew their schedule. Security moved swiftly to create a path, but the flashes had already begun. Meghan adjusted her coat, lifting her chin. Harry followed closely, instinctively moving his hand toward hers, and that was when everything changed. That single moment, born from fatigue, misunderstanding, and pride, became the spark that would ignite a global storm. But in that car ride, in that suite, in those silences, the story had already begun writing itself. The night after the celebration was not marked by a dramatic argument or raised voices. It was marked by something quieter, more telling, the slow erosion of connection beneath the weight of public life. The smiles of the gala had faded, the applause had gone silent, and what remained was the reality behind the performance. Two people who once stood united against the world, now separated by the very spotlight they fought so hard to control. The black SUV slowed as it turned into the private access lane at JFK. Dawn was just breaking, washing the horizon in pale orange light. The air was cool, the city still half asleep, but the terminal was already alive with movement. Airport staff pushed luggage carts, travelers in winter coats hurried toward security, and near the arrival gate, a small group of paparazzi had gathered, their breath visible in the cold air. They knew who they were waiting for. The back door of the SUV opened first. Meghan stepped out, poised and polished as if she were walking onto a stage rather than into an airport. She wore oversized sunglasses, her hair neatly tied back, her beige coat wrapped tight around her. Her assistant handed her a passport holder and whispered something quickly. She nodded and began walking briskly toward the entrance. Behind her, Harry emerged, carrying a small duffel bag slung over one shoulder, dressed casually in jeans and a dark jacket. He blinked against the sudden flash of cameras. "Harry! Meghan! Over here!" shouted a voice from the crowd. They didn't stop. They never did. Their security detail moved ahead, clearing the way as reporters began calling out questions. The sound of cameras clicking created a rhythm of its own, relentless, mechanical, invasive. Harry reached for Meghan's hand, almost by instinct, the way he had so many times before when the lights felt too bright and the noise too much. It was a gesture that once symbolized unity, reassurance, a small private bond in the midst of chaos. But this time, the response was different. Meghan's pace didn't slow. Her body stiffened slightly as his hand brushed hers. Then, in one swift motion, subtle yet unmistakable, she pulled her hand back. Her lips moved as she whispered something under her breath, the words barely audible above the noise. But the cameras caught everything. Her voice, low and sharp, carried just enough for the nearest microphone to pick up the phrase that would echo around the world before the day was over. "Don't hold my hands." The words seemed to cut through the morning air. Harry froze for half a second, his expression flickering. Surprise, confusion, hurt, before he composed himself. He nodded faintly, lowering his hand, and followed her through the sliding glass doors into the terminal. The moment lasted less than 5 seconds, but by then, at least 3 cameras had captured it in perfect clarity. Within hours, it would be on every screen, slowed down, analyzed, and replayed endlessly. Inside the terminal, the mood didn't improve. Meghan moved ahead quickly, her eyes fixed forward, expression neutral but tight. Harry followed a step behind, his jaw clenched. One of their aides attempted to break the tension, whispering about boarding arrangements, but neither responded. The photographers outside continued shouting, flashes bouncing off the glass as they disappeared into the private security lane. Passengers nearby watched in hushed fascination. Most didn't even realize who they were at first. Two well-dressed travelers surrounded by security at an ungodly hour. But then someone whispered, "That's Meghan and Harry." The words spread quickly, like a spark in dry grass. Phones were raised. Videos began recording. As they approached the screening area, Meghan adjusted her scarf, glanced at her reflection in the glass, and smoothed her hair. Harry glanced at her briefly, his face unreadable. He had seen this side of her before, the focus, the need for composure, but this morning it felt different. It felt like the space between them had grown into something physical, visible to everyone watching. While security checked their documents, Meghan's assistant stepped forward to handle logistics. Harry shifted his weight, exhaling slowly. "You didn't have to say that," he muttered. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried something heavier. Meghan turned slightly, lowering her voice. "Say what?" she asked, as if she hadn't heard. He hesitated. "At the car. About not holding your hand." Her expression hardened just slightly, then softened again, the way someone recalibrates when realizing they're being watched. "Harry," she said quietly, "there were cameras everywhere. You know how that looks. We can't feed into it every time." He blinked, unsure whether to respond. "Feed into it?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've always done it. It's who we are." She looked at him, eyes steady. "It's who we were. Not tonight." The attendant motioned for them to proceed. The conversation ended there. As they walked toward the lounge, the tension was unmistakable. The assistants exchanged quick glances but said nothing. Harry's expression was stoic, his movements controlled, but every so often, he glanced at Meghan with that mix of confusion and restraint, as if still trying to process what had just unfolded. Meghan, meanwhile, walked with perfect posture, her pace unbroken, her focus unshakable. By the time they reached the VIP waiting area, the first notifications were already lighting up phones across the city. One of the photographers had uploaded the clip to social media within minutes of the encounter. "Meghan Markle snaps at Prince Harry at JFK," read the caption. Another account posted a slowed-down version with the words, "Don't hold my hands," subtitled in bold white letters. It spread fast, moving through social platforms like wildfire. Within 30 minutes, the moment had gone viral. By sunrise, it was news. Inside the lounge, oblivious to the scale of what was unfolding online, Meghan sat near the window, scrolling through her phone. Harry sat across from her, silent. The hum of jet engines outside filled the silence between them. Occasionally, an aide entered with updates, each time greeted with a brief nod from Meghan, a polite thank you from Harry. But the air between them remained heavy. Harry leaned back, eyes on the tarmac beyond the glass. "It was supposed to be a good trip," he said quietly. Meghan didn't look up. "It was," she replied. "We did what we came for." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "If you say so." There was no anger in his tone, just fatigue. The kind that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the slow erosion of patience. A few feet away, one of their aides checked his phone and froze. The clip was already everywhere. He hesitated before walking toward them, unsure whether to interrupt. Meghan noticed. "What is it?" she asked. The aide looked uneasy. "It's a video, ma'am. From outside. It's trending already." He handed her the phone. On the screen, the moment played on loop. The airport entrance, the flash of cameras, the hand reaching, the recoil, the whisper. "Don't hold my hands." The sound wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. Enough for headlines, enough for speculation, enough to turn a private moment into global spectacle. Meghan's jaw tightened slightly. She watched the clip twice, then handed the phone back. "Ignore it," she said calmly. "It'll pass." But even she didn't sound convinced. Harry looked down, shaking his head faintly. "It never passes," he murmured. "It just changes shape." The aide stepped back, unsure what to do. Meghan leaned against the window, exhaling softly. Outside, the first light of the morning turned the runway silver. Planes taxied slowly, their engines roaring softly in the background. For a few moments, they both watched in silence, neither speaking, both aware that the day had already slipped out of their control. An hour later, as they boarded the plane, phones around the world were lighting up with headlines. "Trouble in Paradise? Humanitarian award night turns sour." Meghan pulls away from Harry in awkward airport scene. Comment sections filled with theories. Body language experts began offering instant analyses. News outlets clipped the video for their morning programs. The moment was dissected from every angle, slowed down, zoomed in, debated as though it were evidence in a trial. On board, Harry sat by the window, earbuds in, staring at the clouds. Meghan opened a magazine, flipping through the pages without focus. Occasionally, her phone buzzed in her lap. She ignored it. The air between them felt colder than the morning outside. The plane took off, engines roaring, climbing above the city. Below, New York shrank into a grid of lights and steel. From this height, everything looked peaceful, quiet, orderly, far removed from the noise waiting for them when they landed. But down on the ground, the story was already writing itself in real time, spreading faster than they could imagine. The "Don't Hold My Hands" clip wasn't just a fleeting moment anymore. It had become a symbol. For critics, it confirmed long-held suspicions about fractures in the couple's relationship. For supporters, it was an unfair invasion of privacy, another example of how their every movement was misinterpreted. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between, tangled in exhaustion, pride, and the suffocating glare of constant scrutiny. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, millions had already seen the video. Analysts were debating its implications on morning television. One commentator called it a moment of human frustration. Another called it a public unraveling. Yet both missed the same essential truth. What the world had witnessed wasn't a collapse. It was a symptom, a glimpse into the quiet, invisible weight that fame and expectation had placed on two people who once believed love could outshine it all. As the cabin lights dimmed, Harry closed his eyes, head resting against the seat. Meghan adjusted her blanket, her face composed but distant. Outside the window, the sun broke through the clouds, flooding the cabin with gold. The world below was just beginning to wake, and with it, another wave of stories. Stories neither of them could control, stories that would once again define who they were to everyone but themselves. The argument at the airport was not a spectacle of shouting or public collapse. It was quiet, controlled, painfully human. A gesture denied, a phrase whispered, a moment magnified beyond recognition. Yet within that moment lived the truth that fame refuses to hide. Even those who appear untouchable can falter. Even the strongest partnerships can bend under the gaze of millions. As their flight carried them toward another day of headlines and speculation, the question that lingered wasn't whether Meghan had meant what she said. It was what those words revealed about the life they now lived. A life where even the smallest gesture could ignite a storm, where intimacy itself had become a performance, and where the cost of being seen was the gradual loss of being known. Within hours of the footage surfacing, the clip of Meghan pulling her hand away from Harry became the centerpiece of every talk show, news feed, and online thread. Television networks played it in endless rotation, dissecting it from multiple camera angles. The audio was looped, slowed down, captioned, and magnified until the private moment became a cultural event. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a full-blown case study in human behavior. Every gesture, blink, and muscle twitch was analyzed by people who claimed to see beneath the surface: body language experts, psychologists, media analysts. Each brought their own interpretation, their own certainty about what that simple exchange truly meant. The first to appear on the morning circuit was Dr. Eliza Harwood, a behavioral psychologist known for her meticulous breakdowns of political and celebrity body language. On a popular breakfast show, she sat across from the host as the clip played behind them on a large screen. Her commentary was calm, almost clinical. "What we're seeing here," she began, "isn't just a moment of irritation. Meghan's reaction is defensive, not aggressive. The way she pulls her hand away, quickly, then folds her arms, suggests emotional overload. She's setting a boundary, likely due to stress or fatigue." The host nodded gravely, prompting her to continue. "Notice Harry's expression immediately afterward," she added. "His eyes drop, his mouth tightens slightly. That's what we call a micro-expression of resignation. He's used to these moments." By mid-morning, other experts had weighed in with different interpretations. Some framed it as a clash of personalities. Others described it as a symbolic unraveling of the image they had carefully cultivated. One commentator argued, "This wasn't about a hand. This was about control. Meghan's gesture shows dominance in the relationship, while Harry's reaction reveals submission." Another disagreed. "That's too simplistic. This looks like classic overstimulation, a couple under pressure, managing public life while trying to maintain composure." The contrast in opinions only fueled the frenzy. People online took sides, repeating sound bites and memes. Some sympathized with Meghan, saying she had every right to reclaim her space amid relentless exposure. Others accused her of disrespecting Harry in public, of orchestrating the moment deliberately to assert control. The digital noise grew louder with each passing hour. By afternoon, a longer version of the footage surfaced from a different camera angle, showing the seconds before Harry reached for her hand. This new perspective added more layers of interpretation. One analyst paused the video just before the gesture. "See the set of her shoulders?" he pointed out. "That's tension. She's already irritated before he reaches out." Another disagreed again. "No, that's focus. She's bracing for the photographers, keeping her composure." The debate turned into a chorus of contradictions, every frame carrying a different meaning depending on who was watching. Dr. Jonathan Pierce, a British expert in nonverbal communication, offered perhaps the most balanced view during an evening panel discussion. "People forget that gestures don't happen in isolation," he said. "Every movement, every reaction is context-driven." They had just come from a high-pressure event, surrounded by flashing lights, noise, fatigue, and expectation. What we see as rejection could simply be a boundary drawn in a stressful moment. "But what's fascinating," he continued, leaning forward, "is how the public reads these cues as symbols rather than human reactions. We turn a sigh into defiance, a blink into deceit, a glance into dominance. It says more about us than about them." Meanwhile, online forums filled with amateur analysts who felt no need for credentials. Threads titled "Meghan Snaps Again" and "Harry Looks Broken" racked up thousands of comments. Users posted side-by-side photos comparing their earlier appearances, hand-holding at the Invictus Games, affectionate glances during interviews, with this new footage. "You can see the difference," one commenter wrote. "Look at how far apart they walk now." Others countered with empathy. "They've been through too much. Anyone would crack under that kind of pressure." What began as a brief gesture had become a global referendum on the state of their marriage. Television studios kept bringing in new voices. A former royal staffer appeared on one network, claiming that Meghan's withdrawal reflects long-standing issues about control and image. Another, who had worked in PR, said, "They know how powerful body language is. Every public appearance is rehearsed. So if she pulled away, it was intentional." But perhaps the most striking commentary came from a relationship therapist who appeared on a late-night panel. "What's happening here," she said, "isn't about fault. It's about communication breakdown in real time. The problem is that their lives have no private space left to mend it. Every correction, every sigh, every look is captured and judged." In London, early morning news shows picked up the story with equal intensity. The clip ran under the headline, "Airport Tension Marks End of Glamorous New York Visit." Pundits debated whether the Sussexes' relationship had reached a breaking point or whether the media was, once again, feeding off exaggeration. A former royal correspondent put it bluntly, "This is what happens when you live by the camera. It turns every human reaction into spectacle." Meghan and Harry have always been aware of this, yet they can't escape it. By evening, even social scientists were weighing in, discussing parasocial dynamics, the way audiences form emotional relationships with public figures. One sociologist noted, "The audience feels entitled to interpret these gestures because the couple's story has always been a public one. The more they share, the more ownership the public feels. So when something as small as a hand pull happens, it feels personal to millions." Still, the most haunting analysis came from Dr. Harwood in a follow-up interview that night. She replayed the clip again, zoomed in on Harry's face just after Meghan's hand moved away. "Forget Meghan's reaction for a moment," she said. "Look at his expression. That's a man who realizes he's being watched at his most vulnerable. There's sadness, not anger. That's the tragedy of their situation. Every attempt to connect, every small lapse, is turned into public drama. It's no longer a marriage. It's a microscope." Harry and Meghan, still in transit as the storm unfolded, had no idea how large it had grown. By the time their plane landed, global outlets had begun running full think pieces. "Body language reveals rift in royal rebels," read one. Another headline declared, "Expert says Meghan's gesture symbolizes loss of unity." The analyses spilled into podcasts, tabloids, and opinion columns. Even those who had no interest in royal affairs found themselves drawn to the clip, the allure of dissecting human intimacy exposed under the harshest light. By the following morning, major networks were hosting live debates. One panel on a global news channel displayed split-screen footage. On one side, Meghan and Harry's earlier affectionate moments. On the other, the airport scene. "Look at the difference," the host said. "What happened to that connection?" The guests discussed it as though it were a policy issue rather than a personal moment. "Public image fatigue," said one. "Emotional distance," said another. "Authenticity under strain," concluded the third. Behind the analysis was a deeper truth that few dared to articulate outright. The audience didn't just want to understand the gesture. They wanted to feel superior to it. Watching perfection fracture made people feel reassured about their own imperfections. The same media that once celebrated Harry and Meghan's love story now feasted on its fragility. In the swirl of commentary, one question began to dominate. Was this the beginning of the end for their carefully curated image? Experts suggested that even if the gesture was trivial, perception could change everything. "Once people see conflict," said one communications strategist, "it's hard to unsee it. Public trust relies on consistency, and once that cracks, every future gesture gets filtered through suspicion." And so the story evolved from one moment to a narrative of doubt. In less than 24 hours, the conversation had moved from behavior to symbolism, from fact to metaphor. Meghan's withdrawal became shorthand for control, Harry's stillness for silence, their combined presence for tension disguised as teamwork. The world wasn't watching a marriage anymore. It was watching a myth come undone in slow motion. By the end of the week, the experts had exhausted their theories. Some doubled back, insisting the gesture was misunderstood. Others stuck to their first interpretation, now bolstered by patterns observed in past events. But in truth, none of them could answer the simplest question. What had Meghan and Harry felt in that moment, in that sliver of time between gesture and reaction? No expert could measure the weight of exhaustion or the cost of living a life without privacy. The media soon moved on to other headlines, but the video remained, replayed endlessly in corners of the internet that never sleep. Its power lay not in what it revealed, but in what it suggested. A 5-second interaction had become a mirror for an entire cultural obsession, with image, with control, with the illusion of knowing strangers. For all the analysis, no one had truly understood the couple any better than before. They had only confirmed one thing, that in the age of constant visibility, truth is never what happens, but what people decide it means. And for Harry and Meghan, the meaning of that one gesture would linger long after the experts stopped talking, echoing quietly in the space between them. By the next morning, New York's skyline was bathed in pale sunlight, but the headlines were anything but calm. What had begun as a fleeting moment at the airport had turned into a full-blown media event. Every major outlet, from the most respected newsrooms to the loudest tabloids, had seized the story and spun it into their own version of truth. The narrative was no longer about an award, an event, or humanitarian work. It was about an argument, a gesture, a public fracture. On television, anchors spoke with the deliberate rhythm of urgency. Just hours after being named Humanitarians of the Year, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex appeared to have an uncomfortable exchange at JFK Airport, announced one morning host. Was this simply exhaustion, or is there more to the story? The screen behind her displayed the now infamous freeze frame, Harry reaching, Meghan pulling away, and the blurred lights of the terminal in the background. At breakfast tables and offices around the world, people watched, intrigued. Some sipped coffee and shrugged, calling it trivial. Others leaned forward, transfixed. It didn't matter whether they were royal watchers, casual viewers, or critics. The image demanded attention. It was the kind of story that transcended its own smallness, a simple human interaction inflated into a symbol of something larger. By noon, the British tabloids had printed their editions with bold, unforgiving headlines. "The Duchess snubs her prince," one paper declared. Another read, "Cold shoulder in the Big Apple." Across the Atlantic, American media took a more polished but equally speculative tone. Body language raises questions after gala triumph, one magazine cover teased. Underneath, smaller text promised exclusive insights from sources close to the couple. Those so-called sources, anonymous and contradictory, painted wildly different pictures. One described the exchange as nothing unusual, while another claimed tensions had been brewing for days. Social media turned the headlines into a storm. On one platform, short clips of the incident had been viewed millions of times, often accompanied by music, sarcastic captions, or mock voiceovers. Memes emerged by the hour. Harry's face turned into reaction images. Meghan's gesture looped endlessly as commentary on relationships in 2025. Hashtags trended simultaneously. Hashtag don't hold my hands, hashtag royal meltdown, hashtag Sussex drama. Amid the noise, a few outlets attempted to redirect attention to the original reason for the trip, the humanitarian award ceremony. But those headlines were quickly buried under the avalanche of scandal. "It's always the personal drama that sells," a senior editor admitted in an interview. "Readers don't want facts. They want emotion. They want a story." Television pundits dissected the headlines themselves. On one talk show, 3 panelists debated whether the media was exploiting the couple or whether the couple had invited such scrutiny by living so publicly. "They walked away from the royal family to control their narrative," one panelist argued. "But they can't have control and visibility at the same time. It's impossible." Another countered, "The public wants transparency, and the Sussexes built their brand on that. You can't sell openness and then demand privacy." Across time zones, the story was localized and reinterpreted. European broadcasters focused on the implications for Harry's relationship with his family. In the UK, Australian news emphasized Meghan's calculated composure. In Africa and parts of Asia, commentary was more subdued. The focus turned toward how fame transforms even the simplest human gestures into spectacle. One of the more striking analyses came from a New York columnist who wrote, "The tragedy here isn't the argument. It's that the world refuses to let them be ordinary. A marriage can't breathe when the air around it belongs to everyone else." Her column gained traction, quoted by those exhausted by the constant scrutiny. Yet even her words couldn't slow the momentum. That same day, a glossy magazine released its digital edition early, featuring a close-up shot of Meghan from the gala. The caption read, "Behind the smile. Inside Meghan's high-stakes week." The accompanying article, based on unnamed sources, suggested that Meghan had been under pressure from multiple directions: brand negotiations, production deadlines, and the endless expectation to perform perfection. It described Harry as increasingly isolated and struggling to reconcile public duty with private exhaustion. None of it was verified, but verification no longer mattered. The narrative had taken root. Meanwhile, television headlines grew sharper. One network used slow-motion playback with dramatic background music as the anchor narrated. Just hours after their glittering night, cracks began to show. Another opened its evening broadcast with the line, "From the ballroom to the breakdown." What happened between the Duke and Duchess in those missing hours? The storytelling had shifted from speculation to screenplay. By late evening, Meghan and Harry's representatives issued a brief statement through a publicist. It read, "The Duke and Duchess are grateful for the recognition of their charitable work and look forward to continuing their humanitarian efforts. Any suggestion of tension or dispute is entirely unfounded and disrespectful." It was polished, restrained, and utterly ineffective. The statement only added fuel to the fire. Critics pounced, calling it defensive and too rehearsed. The headlines continued. The next day, British morning shows invited royal commentators to provide context. "You must understand," one of them said gravely, "body language matters when you're a public figure, especially when your entire brand is built on authenticity and love." Another added, "This is what the monarchy tried to warn him about. Once you leave, you don't escape the spotlight. You just lose control of it." On social media, the narrative shifted again. Some users began defending the couple, arguing that the reaction was overblown. "She was tired," wrote one supporter. "Anyone would be after a night like that." Others used the clip as ammunition in a long-standing cultural debate about celebrity feminism, masculinity, and the fragile balance of power in relationships under fame. Podcasters joined in next, producing hour-long breakdowns with dramatic titles like "What Really Happened at JFK?" and "Inside the Sussex Fallout." The irony was that none of them actually knew what had happened. But the absence of fact left space for endless interpretation, and interpretation was the lifeblood of media engagement. Within 48 hours, the couple's entire trip to New York was being retold through the lens of that single gesture. The gala itself, its speeches, honorees, and causes, was reduced to footnotes. The focus was now squarely on their relationship, their image, and what it supposedly represented.